Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
Respond to me. Respond to me.
you?
How you would respond to me?
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
Good morning and welcome to AM Prime on WESN. I am Naomi McNish. So this morning on AM Prime, we turn our attention to a developing situation that has major implications for our region. The United States has staged its largest military buildup in the Caribbean since 1994, deploying an aircraft carrier, strike group, an amphibious ready group, advanced fighter jets, bombers, submarines, and special operations forces under what it calls Operation Southern Spare. So to help us understand the scale, purpose, and possible consequences of this deployment, especially for Venezuela, and for small states like Trinidad and Tobago, this morning we are joined by Dr. Evan Ellis, again, a Latin America research professor at the U.S. War Army College, and a leading analysis on security issues in similar to this. Good morning, Dr. Ellis, and welcome to AM Prime.
Good morning, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be with you on the program.
Thank you. So, jumping straight into Dr. Ellis, your analysis, which I read, it was very thorough. It describes this as the largest U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean since 1994. So, for viewers here in Trinidad and Tobago, can you explain the strategic purpose behind this surge in these various ships, aircraft, and even personnel? And what exactly does that mean Washington is signaling?
No, certainly. Well, To begin with, what the U.S. administration, President Trump has said, of course, the focus on counter-drug operations, and I would note that of the strikes, and acknowledging that those strikes and the use of lethal force have certainly been controversial with respect to their legality, but those have indeed occurred in both the Eastern Pacific as well as in the Caribbean, and of course, one would also note the work that the U.S. does and the pressure that has been increased working with our partners in Mexico and in Colombia. And so there is certainly a broader counter-drug theme that I think you clearly see and that you hear the president talking about. But beyond that, of course, with the focus on Venezuela, the designation of the Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization, which at least the administration's position is that that gives certain authorities to potentially conduct operations against the group that the U.S. believes is essentially the leadership of Cartel de los Soles rather than the legitimate government in Venezuela, essentially an occupying force. And that would be Nicolas Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, Jorge and Delcy Rodriguez, et cetera, especially after the elections on July 28th, 2024, that Edmundo Gonzalez and the opposition clearly won. But looking at that force, although right now what the president has discussed is land strikes, which could be everything from actions against particular installations or drug labs or leaders of the Cartel de los Soles involved in sending drugs. But President Trump has also been very adamant that the leadership of the Cartel de los Soles needs to go, which would theoretically open up things for the legitimate government to be able to retake power. And so I think one can understand the enormous force that's been accumulated in that context. You have, again, probably the aircraft carrier, the Ford, if there was a major operation, if the Venezuelan military did not essentially put it into Cartel de los Soles itself, what one might expect, for example, if there was a very large operation, is it might involve using some of those destroyers and cruisers. I believe there are 2 cruisers and now 5 destroyers, literally with hundreds of missile tubes, Tomahawks and other missiles, which would probably be fairly effective in taking out those Russia-supplied air defenses and other things. You might expect special operations. There's a special operations mothership among the things off the coast. If there was a military response by Venezuela, if some of the Russian Sukhoi 30 fighters were launched against those forces, you have at least 10 of the best air defense, air superior fighters in the world, the F-35s, which have been deployed to the U.S. facility in Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico, which has been reopened. My understanding is that the government, your current new government of Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessere has been very supportive, although has been emphatic that no attacks would be necessarily launched from Trinidadian soil. But certainly with the visit of the head of our Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, just a couple of days ago, one could expect that certainly the government is being brought into the loop in terms of what could happen and the support of Trinidad and Tobago to that, as well as the support of others, such as, for example, the Dominican Republic, which, again, just days ago, their very pro-U.S. President offered the use of 2 facilities, San Ysidro military air base and their main international airport, Airport de las Americas, for potential counter-drug operations. And so there's more details, but that is what I see as kind of the general posture. And the question then is, the president having listened to Nicolas Maduro, had a telephone conversation, have come to the conclusion that what Maduro wants, things like amnesty and continuation of his government through Delcy Rodriguez staying in power, et cetera, is not in line with what the U.S. feels that it must have to put an end to the threat. And so the question really is now, what happens next. I wouldn't be surprised if there was not some sort of at least limited military operation using those forces. Again, probably missiles initially because the air defenses haven't been taken down yet. But that's how I understand kind of what the forces could be used for if the president gives a decision.
Right, and then based on that, specific mix of military hardware, so some of the things that you mentioned, and especially the presence of the USS Gerald R. Ford in the Caribbean waters, what kinds of operations, based on that, what kinds of operations would the U.S. be preparing for? Specifically, how serious is it? Sorry.
No, absolutely. My sense is that the posture of my government is that the threats that come from Cartel de Solis, essentially military occupation of Venezuela, has to be put to an end. Is the broader stopping of harm to the United States. So, given that determination, the question then is how. And so it appears that, again, those negotiations, the phone call, has not worked out as expected. It appears that thus far, the Venezuelan military has not decided that matters are going to be taken, that they're going to take things into their own hands to save their own skin. And so the question really is, okay, what comes in terms of next with the pressure and what might have to come if that pressure doesn't work. So I would speculate that what would logically come next might be the extension of those strikes by sea to, as the president has indicated, strikes by land. Again, I suspect that because you do have, some Russia-supplied air defense systems. They're older, but still have some capabilities and threaten U.S. aircraft, like the Russia-supplied S-300 air defense missiles and the other missiles that the Russians recently brought in through those Ilyushin 76 transports, probably to protect those sites. And so probably any initial strikes would be missiles like Tomahawks, which might be fired off of the cruisers from sea or fired from the destroyers at sea. Although you could imagine that special operations on the ground could also be used in conjunction with that type of thing. But so one could imagine limited strikes, at least as initial step. The question then is, if those limited strikes did not also, change the situation, what would come after that? And that's where I think you get into the key distinction of a major action to potentially remove the Cartel de Solis leadership, to leave the door open for the legitimate government of Edmundo Gonzalez to restore control. I frankly wouldn't expect boots on the ground, although the administration says that they have not committed one way or the other. But to me, everything that President Trump has said is that we are not looking to make a prolonged, very expensive presence, one that might give the impression that the U.S. is an occupying force. And so what I could expect could happen is that initial strike, again, might be initial barrages of missiles and things and special operations to take down the air defenses, to take down the command and control nodes, et cetera. That would probably, once you had those air defenses down, would logically be complemented by sorties, maybe from Roosevelt Roads, maybe from the Gerald R. Ford, to go after other targets as they pop up. Because you really can't use those F-18s off the Gerald Ford. You have 75, so you have a lot of firepower. But you have to wait until the air defenses are down before that, because it's not inherently a stealthy fighter.
But we can definitely expect to see a strike happening from one of those. Is it coming from the ship itself?
I think logically at this point, if you saw strikes, you could see either special operations forces coming in a stealthy manner, and again, there's a special operations mothership out there, et cetera. But I suspect that initial strikes would logically come through missiles from, again, I calculate that just the number of missile tubes that those 5 destroyers and 2 cruisers have amounts to 700 to 800 missile tubes, of which not all are land attack missiles, but you've got a lot of missiles that could easily do a volley of 10 or 20 missiles against a particular military target or hardened bunker or again airfield that's been used to send drugs. And then again, you probably wouldn't logically see the use of the carrier-based aircraft until those air defenses that would threaten that type of aircraft were down. The benefit of a carrier-based aircraft that's close in is that once the air defenses are down, you can generate a lot of sorties, a lot of flights against targets, including ones that you identify that you missed or that pop up. And again, it's possible also that the U.S. military facility there in Roosevelt Roads, whose capacity has been expanded, more fuel trucks, more maintenance facility, and a improved runway, could also be used to launch not only the air superiority fighters but other assets. And so initially, I would expect mostly missiles, maybe some special operations forces. If it went to another stage, again, you might see more the use of things like carriers or land-based aircraft.
Right. Now, your article also points to enhanced surveillance, and as you would have mentioned, the upgrades at Roosevelt Roads, and also recently there was a radar system installed right here, in Tobago. So let's try to understand, what does that mean or signal, or what role do these systems play in a possible U.S. operation against Venezuela if things begin to unfold?
Sure. So first of all, I think it's important to distinguish between those surveillance or maritime domain awareness assets that come, that the U.S. brings to theater itself, especially under its sovereign control. And so you have aircrafts like the E-8s that do surveillance. You have things like long-range drones, the MQ-9s, for example, and a range of others. Plus, you have a whole array of satellite-based surveillance assets and things like that. But in addition to that, of course, the key thing that often is misunderstood is that we've been doing military cooperation focused on the needs of our partners, including Trinidad and Tobago, including Grenada and others, for a long time. So my understanding is that while the particular radar that was installed in Trinidad and Tobago, it depends on your sovereign government how that might be used. But my understanding is that the nature of our foreign military supply system, where it literally takes years to identify a need and validate the need and find the capability and then program the capability and deploy the capability, that radar was probably in the pipeline based on your government's needs to control its airspace against narco-traffickers and things like that for years. The same thing with the radar in Grenada. Now, could your government authorize that radar be used, to identify air defense threats? So, for example, those Russian Sukhoi 30 fighters that might be, launched from bases against U.S. forces, possibly. I think that's going to depend on what your government has agreed to cooperate. Again, my understanding is that right now, at least publicly, your government has not indicated that it would allow offensive U.S. forces to be launched from Trinidad soil, but has made clear that if there were attacks against Trinidad and Tobago, if there was a move against Guyana's Essequibo region, that that certainly your government would be willing to play part of that defense. But overall, you use these type of assets when you want to get a sense of what's going on. Not only so with the ground-based radars, it's of course usually to detect the location and identity of aircraft that are launching, and then the air assets, you do get a what they call aid to the common air picture to see what's going on in the air, but also often to see what's going on, depending on the specific assets, on the ground. And so, is there movement of Venezuelan forces? Where are they launching from? Et cetera, et cetera. Right.
Now, based on your own research, is the Caribbean now part of this operational theater, whether internationally or not, simply because of its proximity to Venezuela? Is it just by default now part of, all the operations happening, or strategic plans, etc.?
No, it's a great question. So I think first it's important to remember that for years and years, and even with the question of, how did the current government of Prime Minister Kamala get elected, is Trinidad and Tobago has long been on the front line of damages coming out of Venezuela. I recall, the big controversies over the, more than 100,000 Venezuelan immigrants that fled the country, the impacts on criminality and the stresses on the social system, et cetera, from those first coming over on the ferry and other means, but later just even trafficking in arms and things like that. And of course, the drug transits, the route that goes across the Caribbean to Hispaniola, to the Dominican Republic, is certainly not the only route. As you're aware, there are many routes that go through Trinidad and Tobago, both to the U.S. and to Europe. And so I mentioned this, that for a long time, Trinidad and Tobago has been on the front line. And if we look at other threats that's been presented to the region by Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago is right strategically in the middle of that. So, for example, its location, the threats by the Maduro regime, its claims to Essequibo, 2/3 of Guyana's territory and most of its oil wealth and some of its mineral wealth. The prospect of Venezuelan action that goes right there through Trinidad and Tobago. So I think different parts of the Caribbean inherently, because of the nature of things going on, the drug transits over the years, the migratory routes, etc., and certainly the Caribbean waters, inherently any part of U.S. operations, and so. I think it was fortuitous that there's, that I think we've been very fortunate in the United States that both your government and the government of President Luis Abinader in the Dominican Republic have been very cooperative, recognizing that threat. The visit, by Secretary of Defense Hegseth to Santo Domingo, and of course that by General Kane to Trinidad and Tobago. But yes, the geographic location, I think, which has long had these negative security impacts on the region that even I think has impacted the course of your politics, has also, makes it important in having cooperation within our countries to control those flows of drugs, and certainly the question of where any major U.S. force, like it or not, goes, inherently involves the Caribbean.
Right. So I just want to go back to a point you made a little while ago when we were talking about the radar systems, and you mentioned that once these systems are installed, they take years, right, for that to be official. So is it that it's not necessarily connected to Operation Southern Spare? And I'm asking this just because, that being installed in Tobago, it has created a lot of conversation amongst Trinbagonians, and it has people very anxious and wanting to know what does this really mean. But so just to clarify, you're saying that it may not necessarily be connected to the operation.
It may not be. So I don't want to get ahead of the commitments that your government's made in contact with ours. But again, most of my career I've worked with our own military. And what I can tell you is our security cooperation offices, and we've long had a very, very good security cooperation with Trinidad and Tobago like other places. There's typically a process of identifying, working in dialogue with your government as others. What are the needs? Okay, you need more control of the airspace. You need more intercept capability with respect to perhaps more boats. You need there's a desire to have more training. Perhaps involving U.S. educational facilities like our Western Hemisphere, National Security Center, WINSEC, or others. And so these conversations, there's a process that our security offices out of our embassies use, which is to have that conversation with your sovereign armed forces, basically as part of your planning to say, okay, well, what additional things that we might be able to give or that you have do you need? So there's an identification of needs. There is a kind of analysis of alternatives. What do we have on our side that can fit those needs? So again, radars are a really common element of that because, as you can know, with all the drug traffic going through the Caribbean, there's a real need for the sovereign countries to have a sense of what's going on in the airspace. And of course, working together in the Caribbean. So the regional security system, the RSS, or for example, collaborating with our common air picture out of JAD of South, that major facility in which there are Trinidad and Tobago military persons represented in Key West, Florida. But in all of these cases, this process of identifying military needs and how do we best supply them, and putting that in our budget and our planning, and actually acquiring that, and then getting that to you. Those things, matter of fact, people often complain how long that can take. So sometimes it can take 3-4 years. So I am very confident that the radars that are currently being installed, were something that have been in discussion for years, based on a legitimate need by your sovereign government to control its airspace against drugs and things like that. I don't have the specific details because I haven't seen that case. But now, given that you now have that installed radar, would your government allow it to be used as part of the common air picture? I think that's going to depend on the decisions by your government. But this is, to the best of my knowledge, not something that was just occurred to somebody last week, that somebody just pulled a radar out of the box and brought it into your country. I'm sure this has been years in the planning.
Right, I got you. So now we would have spoken about the possible types of strikes that can happen based on the assets that are currently in place. Now, if the U.S. were to launch a high-volume strike campaign of some sort, what is the likely impact on neighboring states in terms of, maritime safety, airspace disruptions, or even, types of humanitarian flows, that kind of thing?
Great question. So I would emphasize that there are, certainly some risks, and I suspect that one of the reasons why the head of our Joint Chiefs, General Kane, was there was to discuss how we would work together to respond to some of those risks. But I should also emphasize that there are also significant benefits, given that Trinidad and Tobago, for example, has long been gravely impacted by outflows of Venezuelan migrants and some of the criminality associated with that, whether it was just people bringing over guns for toilet paper or things like that. So certainly, the strikes themselves, these tend to be, relatively. I would expect that those any initial precision strikes against Venezuelan targets, there might be notices to maritime notices that would go out, as has happened with other previous strikes, areas to avoid. Indeed, one of the issues with President Trump talking about the closure of the airspace, the reason why many airlines canceled their service was that with lots of prudence, not wanting to be in a situation where that could occur. So. My sense is that in modern day warfare, there's enough precision with respect to, where missiles and things would be going, that would be there. Now, the question also is, would the Cartel de los Soles regime, Nicolas Maduro, would they try to lash out against their neighbors, whether Dominican Republic or Trinidad and Tobago? And that's always a risk. I suspect that any force that would be capable of doing something like that would be eliminated very quickly, if within hours, et cetera, and you have a very, very substantial U.S. force. So I think the protection of our partners and allies is already planned in, and I would not want to be the boat that was launching from Venezuela, the aircraft that was launching from Venezuela, in the middle of that.
Right.
Now, after all that, the question is, if there is some sort of subsequent major U.S. operation, the question is, how much uncertainty, because the big risk is that after the takedown, and I think the question of taking down that leadership, given the number of Venezuelans probably willing to collaborate, both because of the rewards and the conversations and because they're, sick of what Maduro has wrought on the country. But I suspect that after that, if you had those in the country trying to destabilize the new democratic regime to prevent it from consolidating power in certain places, maybe blowing up refineries in Venezuela, maybe blowing up other oil infrastructure, electricity infrastructure. Could you have a situation where, before the new democratic government gets things under control, you could get an outflow of refugees, and how would you handle those refugees? So I suspect that there are always those risks of what could happen in Venezuela after a conflict, and certainly the question of that impact on Venezuela's neighbors. I suspect that, again, those were probably the types of conversations that General Kane and others would have had with your leadership when he came down there, and probably one of the reasons for having those. But I should also emphasize that there are benefits because, again, the prospect of not having a criminal regime that's set up as a franchise to send drugs and illegal mined goods and the Venezuelans that flee selling arms or doing other things or impacting with human trafficking, that to be able to have a neighbor that is not doing those type of things, to have an economically prosperous neighbor next door in Venezuela that is able to work with Trinidad and Tobago as they have before, on oil projects. We can talk about Shell and the Dragon Field and other things, and just not be a source of criminality. So for me, although there are risks, probably the upside of having a prosperous democratic Venezuela that can engage with Trinidad and Tobago and other parts of the region in a legitimate fashion to help develop its resources and its people, the net boost, if this works out as hoped, I think would be enormously, enormously positive in my judgment.
Right. Now, just to take it back slightly, seeing as President Trump, he called for the Venezuelan airspace to be closed. Now, I saw conversations coming out that it's possibly because a strike is imminent. It's going to happen soon, and it's to protect the airspace. Is that a possible case? Is that something that would happen?
Yeah, well, certainly the open source reporting that came out on this was that in their private conversation last week between Trump and Maduro, that the president basically had given Maduro 7 days to leave the country, and that I believe it was Saturday those 7 days had expired, and so at least again according to the open source public reporting, the closure of the airspace was that time had come to an end, and so basically President Trump saying, okay, you've had your chance, you're not getting out. But I think there also was, at least according to the announcement, concern that the situation in Venezuela could be destabilizing, and of course the prospect of U.S. military action after that. So in the interest of safety, saying that airliners shouldn't be planning on flying into or out of Venezuela. Now we are now beyond that, and again, clearly in recent hours, President Trump, as I understand, has rejected those demands. He's indicated the possibility of some sort of imminent action. He said that, again, one never quite knows, and this is an administration where really the president often makes those decisions in a deliberately unpredictable fashion. So you never know what you don't know, but certainly the U.S. forces are there to begin to conduct strikes. The president has indicated that is certainly something on the table. What you'd expect if you were going to have negotiations, listening to the last best pitch that Maduro wants to make, that has happened. And so without saying that something is going to happen in the next couple of days, it wouldn't be and even the types of things that you would do, like talking with your closest partners who would be affected by any strikes, like General Kane's visit to Trinidad and Tobago, like Secretary of Defense Hegseth's visit to the Dominican Republic. Those types of things have happened. So there's really not a lot that, in practical terms, would need to still happen before, and there doesn't. of course, your president may wait, may try a new line of negotiation. So you never know what you don't know. But there's certainly strikes within a brief period certainly would seem possible at this point.
Right. So we do have to wrap, but I want to ask, and this is just based off of your expertise and your studies. Now, what is the single most important indicator that Trinidad and Tobago or even the Caribbean should be watching in the coming weeks to, better understand where the situation is headed? Sure.
Well, when you say where the situation is headed, I mean, I think there's really a couple courses of action. The question is, is there any new negotiation that Maduro comes up with an offer that would legitimately seem to cause him to leave power immediately and remove the Cartel de las Solas threats, including the sending of drugs and things like that. So if you see a really, really big deal, that could indicate that there might be an off-ramp there. Certainly if you see instability within Venezuela itself, going back to like 2020, when you had probably the best attempt by Cristóbal Figuera to turn the military against Maduro then. So if you see like major instability within Venezuela, that could indicate that they're beginning to take matters into their own hands. Certainly if you see reports of U.S. Tomahawk strikes and things like that, that would seem to indicate that that things are going up to the next level. And if you see nothing, probably useful to take a look at what notices to airmen or notices to maritimers or other things are going on, or any particular conversations or activities that seem to be occurring within partner nations around the Caribbean to understand that whether preparations for something either from Venezuela or from the U.S. So depending on, there's lots of courses of action, lots of options to the commander, and so I think you have to look for indicators of different courses to figure out where things are headed. But at the end of the day, my sense is that President Trump is very resolute in not leaving his time in office without putting an end to the situation. And really, it's up to Maduro whether he, essentially takes a graceful exit that involves his own survival, not to be too threatening about it, or continues to try to play around. And my sense is that if he continues to try to play around, as he did under the Biden administration, that this will probably not end well for him. So again, just my personal assessment to see what could happen.
Yeah, awesome. Well, before we close, just I believe you mentioned this, but before any type of strike is given or sent, is there enough? Would any warning or ample warning be given to neighboring states? Because I know there may not necessarily be a warning given to Venezuela, but a warnings given to the surrounding territory.
Well, I think certainly if we're talking about those initial missile strikes and things like that, that really would not pose an immediate threat to neighbors like Trinidad and Tobago or other neighboring states. Probably in the element of surprise, that would happen relatively quickly, although certainly things like notices to maritimers or notices to airmen, might be an indicator of to stay away from those things. But again, there's a lot of precision and control in these type of things. I suspect, again, if there's a larger campaign, there would be some initial indications, but also as the conflict unfolds, some indication of what to do or not to do or to be careful of. But again, my sense by the fact, for example, that General Kane came down and had those conversations with the Kamala government, who's been a very close partner to us, is that there's an understanding of the types of risks that Maduro might lash out in one way or another, and probably an intention to continue to coordinate with partners like Trinidad and Tobago to be prepared for that if that occurs.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Ellis, for coming on and just really clarifying a lot. This morning, the article was very thorough, and it definitely gave us a new perspective and understanding as to what exactly is happening. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me. Real pleasure.
All right, bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break now. When we come back, we have more. Stay tuned.
Three-car raffle organized on behalf of Queens Royal College. First prize is a Royal Ride Ford Ranger. Draw date Saturday, December 20th at the school. Tickets only $100. All proceeds for the further uplifting of the school. Tickets available at islandetickets.com. Sandbag Lotto opposite the Oval. Northern Hardware, Diggle Martin Main Road. West Star Liquor Mart, Moncoco Road. Top Office, Belmont. Hearty Foods Arima. Charlie's Anchor Cafe. Corner Anna Street and Aripita Avenue. Frankie's on the Avenue. Quasi Discount Mart, California. Universal Plumbing, Diggle Martin Main Road. Woodview, Tragrit Road. GAK Electrical and Plumbing, opposite Starlight. Western Union, Tunapuna. VML Minimart, St. Lucian Road. Authors Minimart, Balandra. Alums Pharmacy, Majuma Crossroad. Madison Bar, Diggle Martin. Auto and Lotto Shop, Long Circular Mall. For more info, call the college at 622-1671 or the hotline at 491-1802. Queens Royal College. Christmas 3-car raffle.
It's Christmas time, and with your family you'll spend every evening watching a movie on WESN. The classics that fill your heart with merriment and cheer as we celebrate together the most wonderful time of the year.
This is my island in December.
This Christmas, WESN celebrates with you as the content capital brings the big screen classics.
Yes!
Gather your family and tune in to WESN from December 1st to 31st at 8 p.m. nightly for We Christmas Movie Classics.
Santa's coming to town! Santa! Oh my God! Santa here? I know him! I know him!
Only on WESN, Content Capital.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Welcome back to AM Prime this morning. So now we turn our attention to Tobago, where hoteliers are reporting a wave of booking cancellations linked to growing tensions between the United States and Venezuela. Tourism stakeholders say the geopolitical climate fueled by fears of potential military action has created anxiety among visitors and is already affecting the island's fragile tourism economy. Joining me this morning to discuss these concerns and the real impact on businesses is the president of the Tobago Hotel and Tourism Association, Mr. Reginald McLean. Good morning, Mr. McLean. Welcome.
Morning, and thank you for having me on the program, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. So, Mr. McLean, you've made it clear that the cancellations are not because of the radar systems itself and the installation of that, but because of the rising tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela. Now, can you explain, what are you hearing from visitors and booking agents that indicates this or draws attention to this?
Well, if I take our situation here, for example, approximately 3 months ago, we were at 76% coming in for the Christmas into the New Year period. And approximately 3 weeks ago, we were down to 42%. So that's a loss of 34% of confirmed bookings, which also included one group. And this all went about because of the tensions between the US and Venezuela. And then we had a lot of singular cancellations. Now we've picked back up a little bit. We are back up to approximately 58%. So yes, there is a lot of fallout from the situation with Venezuela.
Yes.
And it's absolutely nothing that any of us can do. It's not so much because of the radar being implemented. I mean, at the end of the day, that in itself is a bit of a deterrent because it now puts certain areas of Tobago at a slightly higher risk than they would have before. But definitely we've seen a downturn, and we are hoping within the next 3 weeks to try and pick some of that back up. But at this late stage, that's kind of doubtful. And we're getting that view from various of our accommodation sector here in Tobago, from the villas to the smaller properties like the bed and breakfasts, etc., and also from the hotels. So it is of great concern to us, especially coming out of the last winter season where bookings were not so great because of the states of emergency that we had.
Yeah. From your vantage point, what exactly are tourists afraid of? Is it safety reasons, the airspace concerns, or just general uncertainty as to, what could happen?
Well, if I take it to the local TNT perspective, tourists coming from Trinidad, meaning our local Trinidad and Tobago tourists, one of their concerns is, if I come to Tobago and the airspace is closed, how am I getting back to Trinidad? I might come for a weekend, I might come for a week. How am I getting back? The concerns out of the foreign countries is pretty much the same. If the airways are closed, how am I getting back to Germany or England or the US or Canada, etc.? So there's a lot of growing concern over the airspace, but also too, just having states of emergencies like we have, and then hearing all these things about the US and Venezuela, and a lot of people who do their research on Tobago understand that Trinidad is only 7 miles away from Venezuela, and we are tied to Trinidad, so it's of great concern to them. Now, I'll go one step further. Whilst we applaud the US for trying to do something about the drug trade and getting that to slow down, which is slowing down our murders in Trinidad and Tobago, it still is something that people look at, and it is a negative to us, especially coming into the winter season.
Now, do you think that the government is, of Trinidad and Tobago is doing enough to reassure the public and the international travel market about safety and stability? Now, if not, what do you think is missing from this?
Well, our government here in Trinidad and Tobago and our Tobago House of Assembly are caught in a situation where we have absolutely no control of the outcome of it. So it's difficult to put out something where you're not 100% sure what you can put out because you don't know what is going on. So I think it's more so the uncertainty. I mean, if the US wants to do what they have to do with Venezuela, it would be nice to do it quickly, get it over with, so we could get back to business as usual. Now, certain people are not going to like me for saying that just now, but that's the reality. We can't stay in a limbo situation for too long. So we need to move this forward, and decisions have to be made if they're going to escalate it or not, so that we can literally get back to business. We can't afford another lost season because the financial fallout for the island of Tobago and also for Trinidad is going to be great as far as tourism is concerned. So do what needs to be done. Let's get it over and done with. But are you then going to pull out of Trinidad and Tobago, and leave us stranded, or how is that going to work in the longer term? Because at the end of the day, once things stop, the drugs are going to start running again, the contraband, the illegal trade in persons, etc. So is this in for the long term? Is it in for the short term? These are answers that the population of Trinidad and Tobago has not gotten. And it's up to our government now to deal with the United States and get those answers for us so that we understand where we move forward and how we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've suggested that Tobago businesses deserve compensation for losses directly tied to this geopolitical confrontation. Now, what form should that compensation take, and who do you believe is responsible for this?
Well, being persons responsible for it, you have to go all the way back to education in schools, and you have to show people that they're taking drugs for whatever reason. So once you create a climate where the use of these drugs are necessary, then that goes all the way back to schooling and everything in the US, in Canada, and Europe, whichever countries are using the drugs. We are just the transshipment point. However, that being said, we need to educate our people as to what tourism is, what the implications and fallout of anything that happens, and what it causes for tourism. But at the same time, I spoke of some sort of compensation. We went through COVID, everything shut down in Trinidad and Tobago. Last year, from December 30th, when we had the first state of emergency, we have a situation where bookings started to be canceled 3 days after that. And we are now into SOE number 3, and added to that is the Venezuela-US crisis. And added to all of that is all the various reports that are put out in the media all over the world of travel restrictions to Trinidad and Tobago. So we've gone from COVID to a very bad winter season last year to a very bad summer season. Yes, we had our peaks and bounds. And where we started to rebound this year for this coming winter season, as you said, now I've gotten 34% cancellations over the period since the US has been in there. Mm-hmm. That adds up to a lot of money. That adds up to a lot of money for everybody who is concerned in tourism, from the taxi driver to the housekeeper, to the restaurateur, to the hotel, to the guest house, to the bed and breakfast. So you're talking millions and millions of US dollars that are not going to flow into the economy of Tobago, as well as Trinidad. Or it may be billions. It's difficult to say how much. So who is responsible for that? And that's why I brought up the thing about school and education, because it goes all the way back.
Right. And then you've also, spoke up about the Chief Secretary not being part of the National Security Council. Based on that, how would Tobago benefit if that structure were changed?
Okay, so Tobago has a Security Council of its own. Mm-hmm. However, we think that if Tobago has a certain degree of autonomy, which it's supposed to have right now, that whoever leads the Tobago House of Assembly as the Chief Secretary should be on the National Security Council of Trinidad and Tobago, not just Tobago. It's one country, but 2 islands with distinctive issues, and we need to have our Chief Secretary here on the Trinidad and Tobago National Security Council.
Mm-hmm. And no, but what is the, how exactly, or what are you looking for then to say if that the Chief Secretary should be on the National Security Council? What exactly are you looking for to come out of it if that was to happen?
Well, a lot of it has to do with dialogue and knowing what's happening within Trinidad and Tobago, not just Trinidad deciding on what happens in Trinidad and Tobago. Yes. We are one country, 2 islands, 2 totally different, whatever you want to call it. However, national security is something that affects both of our islands. Mm-hmm. Yes, we are one country, but 2 islands. Okay. So having the Chief Secretary on the National Security Council will be a plus. So Tobago is more involved in what is going on with the security of Trinidad and Tobago, and more so for us here in Tobago.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about what Tobago needs right now. Practically speaking, in terms of immediate support, what immediate support do tourism stakeholders need to stabilize the situation currently and to reassure travelers?
Well, again, a lot of marketing has to be done and press releases put out as to what's happening within our destination. Now, that could work two ways. That could work against us as well as it could work for us. And that's a risk that you always take when you put out a press release. You have to get to the point where people understand what is happening, and the biggest drawback to that right now with the Venezuela-Trinidad crisis is how close we are to Venezuela, and that we can become a target. Now, I'm not saying we are a target, I'm saying we can become one, and putting the radar in Crown Point does that. We in Tobago, you know, as the central government has said, they want to do a drive towards diversifying the economy more. Well, if that's the case, then we need a tourism minister who is a tourism minister alone. I don't think we need Ministry of Trade, Industry and Tourism lumped in one, because as we all know, trade and industry always will get the better of it. So I'll direct this to the Prime Minister of the country and state that realistically, if we want proper diversification, let's look at having a tourism minister directly for Trinidad and Tobago. And then let's try and do the thrust that we need into tourism in a much greater way and show us that you really want to push tourism forward. And we will reap the benefits. Tobago has a lot of hotel rooms, a lot of guest houses, a lot of bed and breakfast. We figure there's about 3,000 rooms that we know about through the association. And we also figure there's about 6,000 rooms when you take everything into consideration. So flights need the new airport. We need the new airport terminal to be opened. We need a big dive into securing more flights for Tobago, direct flights into the island, as opposed to flights coming into Trinidad. And then you have a lot of issues getting over to Tobago. And we all know the issues. The air bridge can't handle what is required for Tobago. Neither can the sea bridge. So instead of bringing flights into Trinidad, let's bring the flights into Tobago and build the Tobago product. But at the same time, investment needs to be made into the room stock that we have to make sure that it is of international standard and a certain degree of stars per se, so that the people, when they get to Tobago, enjoy the island for what it has. As you know, Tobago is a beautiful place.
Yes.
We have a lot to offer the tourists, but Tobago does need help in moving forward its tourism product.
Now, let's say this, if this does carry on into next year during the carnival season, how badly off do you think the sector will become if things progress as is?
Look at a couple of things that happened recently. Right? Increase in alcohol of 100% throughout Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
Carnival bands have sold all-inclusive packages all over the world for people that come into Trinidad for Carnival. Tobago hotels and Trinidad hotels, well, not so much Trinidad hotels, but quite a number of Tobago hotels have sold all-inclusive packages, including ourselves. I mean, that's not our mainstay, but it's a big part of it. And when you get hit with a 100% increase in alcohol, for example, that takes our costs up, and our losses are going to start flowing in from all-inclusive packages, because you're pricing yourself to be competitive with your neighbors up the islands. And even before this increase in alcohol, a bottle of Black Label rum, for example, was somewhere between 40 and 50% cheaper in Greendot next door to us. So it just goes to show now that that the government has done what they've done with alcohol. That has increased drastically the cost associated with running any property, any restaurant, etc. And it's detrimental to those who have all-inclusive packages.
Yeah. Now, what would you like to say, if you can, speak directly to potential visitors who may be hesitant about traveling to the island?
leave your hesitations at home. Tobago is safe. Our security apparatus in Tobago is doing an excellent job. Yes, we had a few murders for the year, but that is small in comparison to the previous year. And I have good faith in our senior superintendent and our assistant commissioner of police that look after Tobago. So from a crime standpoint, I'll tell you straight that Tobago is extremely safe. It's a lovely destination to come to. It's not overrun by tourists. So you can have your peace in any part of Tobago. The beaches are lovely. The rainforest celebrates 250 years next year as the oldest protected rainforest in the Western Hemisphere. The scuba diving is unparalleled. There's no other country in the world that can beat the scuba diving in Tobago. The bird life that everybody comes here for. You know, it's just, Tobago is nice. We're making sure that we remain secure. But at the same time, anybody coming here has to remember that whilst they're on the island, they have to follow the same security protocols that they follow at home. They're not going to go into areas that are known as bad areas, for example. So as long as you do that, you're not going to have any issues here in Tobago. It's safe, it's beautiful, and we want people to come and enjoy it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. McLean, for that and for joining me on the program this morning. Giving us
thank you again, and good morning again, Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our program this morning. I will leave you with this. Keep smiling because life is a beautiful thing and there's so much to smile about. Keep smiling because life is a beautiful thing and there's so much to smile about, and that is simply just true. I know the conversations this morning, the hope was to just give us better understanding. For as many citizens are on edge, are concerned, are anxious, and we haven't been hearing much. We've been hearing a lot of different things, a lot of different information is coming out on social media, and we don't know what's true and what is true, so what is not true. So definitely when that was the intent for this morning's show, and I believe it was a success. So for our viewers, thank you for tuning in, and we have Sean Michael Small on the hour of 8 o'clock with Talking Points, so don't go too far. And I do hope you have a great day. Stay safe, stay inspired, stay informed, and I'll see you back here again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
And we will provide weapons to Ukraine, which will then make the situation on the ground much more difficult for the Russians? Or will Steve Witkoff say, okay, you don't want this deal, we'll go back to Washington, we'll try to work out something else, and we'll come back and see you again, and Vladimir Putin then will try to make more inroads on the ground and seize more areas of Ukraine? And looking at the ground, we just had in the last few hours the Russians who've been saying that they've captured areas of Ukraine, including Pokrovsk in the east of the country and Voschansk in the northeast of the country. These have both been dismissed by Ukraine as not true, but still shows that Russia believes it's got the upper hand when it comes to capturing territory.